is going to steer the conversation and who is going to get us to think even deeper and also to question how we have been operating as civil society organizations. And I think one thing that came to mind for me when I was thinking of today's webinar was, what does strategic thinking mean for organizations? It obviously means charting the path on how we operate. It obviously means identifying our objectives. It also includes how we are structured, how our reporting system is, how we identify the key areas that we want to focus on, how we even discuss amongst ourselves our successes, our challenges, and how we can maximize on the resources that we have. So it's really at the center of what we do on a daily basis as civil society professionals, but also just generally as individuals who are interested in contributing to development in our society. So I will start by introducing Charles, who is going to be our main speaker today, and he's going to talk to us about strategic thinking, but also the different facets that are involved in that, so relating to planning as well and relating to goal setting as organizations. He's also going to help us think as individuals, but as organizations, as representatives of organizations, and also as a cluster of civil society actors, be it grassroots organizations or traditional civil society organizations. Charles is a social justice activist and thought leader with expertise in strengthening civil society resilience, sustainability, and leadership. Charles serves as a member of the Knowledge Network of the United Nations Office of the Special Advisor to Africa. He currently serves as a member of the governing board of Africans Rising. He is the head capacity development unit at the West Africa Civil Society Institute, certified Change the Game Academy master trainer, and the author of the publication we are going to be discussing today. So as you can see, Charles has a wealth of knowledge, and I'm excited to be hearing from him, also having had the chance to look at the article that we are going to be basing our discussion. As I indicated at the beginning, this is an interactive webinar, so please, as he is sharing his knowledge with us, take the time to go back into your own thought process and find out if there are things that his discussion or his presentation is invoking. If you want to take down any notes, if also you want to write down questions, because we are going to have an engaging session afterwards together with Charles, but also to hear about your experiences working on some of the issues that Charles will highlight. Again, please remember to use the link in the chat box to register and provide your details so that you can receive a recording of this webinar, and also so that you can share it with others who may not be present, but also for our future, going back to what we are going to be talking about today. So I give the floor to Charles for now. Charles?
Hi, Rua. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, excellent. Sorry about that. I'm
Yes,
having
we can hear you.
tough internet challenges today. So I can't switch on my video, but thank you for that introduction, Rua. So greetings to all colleagues and comrades who are participating in this Knowledge Cafe. I'd like to thank my colleagues from the Knowledge Management Unit for inviting me to share my thoughts on the importance of strategic thinking for grassroots organizing. And it's a very important topic, like Rua said, within the context, not only for organized kind of organization in terms of formal organizations, but also for organic organizations. So let me start with providing some context to why I wrote an op-ed on this topic, which is the focus of this specific Knowledge Cafe series. So over the past 8 years, I've had privilege and honor to be associated and engaged with informal associations. Not only informal associations, but self-help groups, community-based organizations, and movements. So I've seen the potency of organized efforts in communities and witnessed people of diverse origins and interests coming together to pursue various social causes, whether it's a social justice issue or a humanitarian issue or even an environmental issue. So I've seen the power of organizing and not agonizing. And I always emphasize this. It's better to organize than to agonize. And I've also seen what people power can do in many of our communities. I believe people power can even do more than we can imagine through grassroots organizing and the right strategic thinking capacities. And so this is what basically led me to write this piece. So what is grassroots organizing? A lot of people always ask me, what is grassroots organizing? So within our context, grassroots organizing, we can describe it as a way of mobilization that comes from the ground up or from the bottom up, come together to address an issue in their community and take action to advocate for social change. So often citizens like me and you, we utilize grassroots organizing for many reasons. We may want to pass a piece of means to us or increase our overall awareness about an issue in our community. So whatever objective we have, right, communities in our countries are now leveraging grassroots organizing to influence political processes and our society. So this is something that we are doing. But however, one of the critical difficulties that I've seen with most of these organized efforts is the capacity and capability to develop shared visions and strategic orientations. So there's always a lot of conversations about the need to plan strategically, which is a positive action. But I realized that often there was not sufficient attention paid to the need to focus on thinking before planning, right? So what has happened is that often this affects the resilience, sustainability, and influence of many community groups and leads to the weakening of their resolve and organizing power. So I decided to focus the article on strategic thinking more than strategic planning, because I've always believed that the thinking must come before planning, right? So what is strategic thinking within a grassroots context or a community context? I think there are two things. I believe it's the process of acquiring skills that enable community groups to use critical thinking to solve our complex problems, right? That means as members of these groups, we should have a grasp of our operating context, our environment, and we should also have a grasp of our internal dynamics in terms of our diversity and interests, right? We must also have the capacity to identify our own problems and needs and propose solutions that we can drive based on our ownership of those solutions, and also assert our own priorities. So it's about leading from the front as members of community based on our own lived experience and priorities. But it's also about us being members of groups that acquire skills that help us to develop a shared vision. And I want to emphasize here, not just a vision, but a vision that is shared. And not only a shared vision, but also shared objectives and a capacity to overcome obstacles and address challenges. So here I want to emphasize on two things: capacity and capability. And sometimes I think we mix it up. Capacity is basically the resources like technical or relational skills, knowledge, services, goods, finance. That is capacities. But then the capability is the ability to apply and leverage all these capacities to effect the social change. So our ability to actually use all these capacities to make a change. So in the article, I make the point that strategic thinking process helps groupings to be clear about their vision and mission. Now, this is critical because often movements and community groups are started with a lot of passion and are often dominated by charismatic leaders who tend to drive the organizing efforts. So there's often very little time invested in building a broad base of understanding of the shared vision, mission, core values to sustain the group. So I argue in the op-ed, excuse me, that a vision must be shared. It should be clear, unambiguous, and easy to internalize, right? And sometimes this is where the challenges are, because we develop visions that are not very clear and easy to internalize. It's not easy for members to connect with. So typically, a vision should answer the following questions. Where do you see the group in the future? What type of effect do you want your group to have on the system, context, or environment in which you work? Where do you want your group to be, like in terms of 10 to 25 years from now, right? So it's the vision, it's the future. You're forecasting the future. So these are deeply reflective questions that must not be taken lightly. Often, it's important that there's a broad base of consultation and negotiations among all stakeholders and members of the community. So there should be real conversations and not the tick-the-box activities that many of us are familiar with in the NGO sector, or attempts to manipulate a certain direction that leadership prefers or is comfortable with. So the process must be led by the people, for the people. And intrinsically, this ensures that the community group has life, dynamism, resilience, and of course, influence. So there are also other factors that I want to highlight, which can be said to be the elements of strategic thinking. I've already highlighted on the importance of visioning, which is the foundational element. There's also the process of developing the group's mission, strategic objectives, core values, and action planning. So for example, you can ask a couple of questions when you're reflecting about the mission or about your mission as a community group. Who are you? What do you serve? Who do you serve? How do you serve? Where are you located? That is, do you have a physical or virtual presence, or you're kind of like a hybrid, right? These are questions you can ask also as you are thinking through your mission. And of course, your mission should align with your vision. So a mission statement is important for community groups because it defines the objectives, the engagement approach, and the target audience. It provides detailed information about what the group does, which is important, how it does what it does, and who it does it with and for, which I think is extremely key. And of course, it also provides the basis for judging the success of an organized effort or a social change campaign. It helps community groups verify if they are on the right track, which is important, and helps to make the right decisions. So it provides direction when the group is tempted, in terms of getting distracted. It's easy to be distracted when you're a community group, right? So it provides, when you have a mission and a clear mission and a clear vision, it provides clear direction. So one of the most important tools that helps feed into all these things I've been talking about is the SWOT analysis. And most of us probably know this tool. It's a very simple tool. Of course, SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, right? And of course, the strengths and weaknesses are internal to your group. You have control over them and can change. So they are often called the controllable factors. But the opportunities and threats are external, right? These are things that happen outside your group. So they are usually called the uncontrollable factors, right? So like I said, I'm very fond of this tool. It's very simple, right? Because yes, it's simple and its ability to bring about profound issues when done with sincerity and honesty, right? So what does the SWOT analysis do? It helps community groups to mitigate threats, capitalize on opportunities, and take advantage of their strengths. It's always important to know your strengths so that you can leverage on your strengths. And most of the groups that I've worked with and that I've had the opportunity to engage with, they are very clear about what their strengths are, and it helps them move forward and be resilient, right? So it builds confidence and gives groups a better idea of what strategic direction to pursue. So I believe that when community groups take their time to do a SWOT analysis, they'll be armed with a solid strategy for prioritizing the work they need to do in their communities, right? But sometimes you may think that you already know everything that you need to do to succeed as a movement or association or collective. But a SWOT analysis will force you to look at your group in new ways and from new directions. And I think that is what is key. So it's both a strategic thinking and also planning tool, right? But before I end so that we can have a conversation, I think it's essential for us to recognize that the use of these tools must be tailored or customized to respond to the existing fluid environment we all see around us. And in this environment, there are many disruptive factors like pandemics, conflicts, climate change, food insecurity, right? So I believe that it's critical that these tools should be used differently from typical traditional approaches based on metrics and rigid scientific methodologies, right? So when we are working in our communities, we should look at different ways of applying these tools to our community circumstances. So I believe that the approach should go beyond technical kind of methodologies or formats. We could even use pictorial, we can use art or storytelling methodologies to respond to how the ways our communities organize and learn, right? So I'd like to conclude by re-emphasizing the importance of grassroots and organizing and why strategic thinking capacities are essential to keep them thriving.
All of them, including Charles.
Charles? Okay.
Hello. Oh, I got muted. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Okay. Where was I? I was concluding.
Yes, you were concluding.
Okay, sorry about that. It's not, these things happen, no problem. So I was just emphasizing that currently we are experiencing serious pressure on democracy. We are experiencing pressure on our ecosystems, on our economy. I mean, in Ghana, we've been complaining about how the economy is almost tanking, and the sovereignty issues, human rights. I mean, things are not getting better the way we want it. And the community groups that are fighting these forces are also under attack. So it's obvious that grassroots organizing needs to be systematically resourced, amplified, and scaled. So because grassroots groups have unique strengths and they connect directly with the lived experience of citizens, right? So in our region and in our continent, many have been involved. Many grassroots groups or grassroots communities have been, or associations or collectives have been involved in struggles over structural inequality and the promotion of human rights. So this is something that we've been doing and we are familiar with. And we bring a distinct awareness of injustices that are either normalized or invisible, right? What we also highlight inadequate public services. We foster accountability. We challenge marginalization within communities, right? And so grassroots organizing is critical for community resilience and prosperity. So I see strategic thinking as that catalyst or the fertilizer that can help community groups to internalize proactive thinking and planning. That is getting ahead of the problems and being able to forecast and respond to problems and see these problems even before they happen. And this is important because we need to avoid being reactionary, right? And that is the challenge of civil society. And I believe strategic thinking will help in this regard. So thanks so much for this opportunity to share. And I look forward to our interactions and contributions.
Thank you so much, Charles. And that was very interesting. And thank you for sharing with us pretty much what you researched on and also what you have found out through your experience working with civil society organizations. I'm quite sure all of us have been taking down notes and have questions, but also have had the chance to think about how our organizations are operating and how, as grassroots organizations or as traditional civil society organizations, we are structuring our work in terms of our planning, in terms of our mission, in terms of our vision. So now we have the opportunity to open up the floor and have a conversation based on what Charles has talked about, but also questions around the ideas that he puts forward. So if you would like to make a contribution, you can raise your hand. You can use the reactions button below at the lower part of your screen and indicates that you would want to say something. Okay, at the moment, I am not seeing any interventions, but please feel free to indicate if you'd like to say something, and also make use of the chat box to highlight that you want to contribute in some way. So I think for me, one of the first questions that I would like to pose for Charles is what you mentioned at the end when you were talking about the catalysis that comes about from strategic thinking. And I was looking at how some grassroots organizations may have problems in terms of agreeing on approaches to take or agreeing on methods to take in their operation. How do you find that strategic thinking might help where already there's a conflict in terms of prioritizing areas to focus on? What is the best way that we can utilize strategic thinking in that regard where already there is conflict among members?
Yeah, Rua, I think that's a really, really good question. One thing I feel strategic thinking helps is with getting more insights and contributions from the wider community. One thing about strategic thinking is that you don't want to conduct the process by focusing only on the leadership or on the most vocal people in the community or the opinion leaders, etc. The trick is that you want to have a broad-based kind of conversation, but then you also need to have a very skillful moderators or negotiators who are able to bring everybody's ideas together and then go to a certain meeting point. And you get to a certain meeting point, and then they also help you to prioritize what is important to the community, right? And so you need to have people who are very conversant with both the community group and the community. And so that helps a lot. And for me, it's part of what I call the design phase of designing a specific intervention or designing a campaign. And usually we don't pay so much attention to it. We usually rush that phase a lot. We because of time constraints, because of the necessity of the problem, and we end up putting together a plan, and then we don't make the impact that we want. So yeah, strategic thinking, I think it takes time, and it needs broad-based consultation, but it also needs skillful moderators and negotiators that can actually take everyone's views and get to a point where things are prioritized.
Thank you, Charles, for that. I think that's very important, and also given that when we are, particularly for grassroots organizations, the idea for it is to be organic and it's also to be as inclusive and participatory as possible. So certainly what you're saying feeds into trying to ensure that and maintain that there's inclusivity in the way that everything is kind of organized and brought together. I will give the floor to 𝐿𝐶𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐽𝐻, and then after that, 𝐒𝐿𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐽𝐻𝐻.
Okay. 𝐿𝐶𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐽𝐻𝐻 is the executive director of �NGO in Togo. I want to congratulate first Charles, but I want to make an observation. This meeting is very important for Africa civil society, but I noticed that this event is in English. What about the French communities? This is very, very, very important for me. Second is that our political countries or persons, they are not the same. If we take Ghana, the political will in Ghana is different from political, for example, in Togo. So awareness raising is our job. But if you don't know how to do it, first, we as a civil society, is it true that we love ourselves? So I think that this many job to do on the ground. We don't love ourselves, and we can push our colleague in politics because they have said something. You interpret on another way. You see, so we as a civil society, we must work together. We must think together. We must have an objective together. But this will be difficult in some countries in Africa. This is my observation. And for the architecture of the institutions at the local level, there are nothing is there. We have only local government, it is all, but not for the SDG implementation. Local government must have local multilateral institution on the ground. For reference for civil society and smart contract sign. If not, I don't think that we can move ahead. Thank you for the moment.
Thank you, 𝐸𝐻𝐸. We can hear from WACSI.
Okay, my name is Bismarck from Ghana, and I am also into community-based organizations, and I have my own association that I've housed all the tertiary students in our municipality, and we carry on social work just to help the society. And my question is that in the civil society, or when it comes to strategic thinking, you will come out with, let's say, the vision, a clear vision that you know that all of you are going to benefit from it, and the society is going to benefit from it, and the society will be a better place to live. But the most difficult part is the members or the team that you are going to work with. Like the organization, the organizing, when you reach out to certain people, some of them, excuse me to use or borrow this word, like it's more or less like they are laymen, and their understanding is somehow low when it comes to certain things. Even if they understand, but they'll just pretend as if they have not understood anything. So sometimes how to collaborate, or since you are more, since you can think critically, how do you pull them along? If you are having the skills or you are very innovative enough, you will think critically and those stuff. But some of them, they find it difficult to move along with you. And their commitment towards any other effort that you are putting in place to make sure that the society becomes a better place, they'll just look at it to be in vain. And they will just, sweep everything off. That has been a major headache, especially my team members and those staffs. We have went to several offices, even some of the people who are educated or stakeholders. You present them your plans, everything well explained, and they will not do anything about it. Because if they then give you the go ahead, you won't carry certain things. So what do you do about that? I'm sorry, I'm a participant of this year's yearly cohort 41. And after my question, I don't know if this question is answered, I will beg everybody we're having a training, and when just I begged them and they gave me this opportunity to come and participate in this program. Thank you.
Thank you, Bismarck. I'll throw the ball back to Charles.
Yeah, thanks, Rua. Yeah, these are not like easy questions. Can everybody hear me? Great. I like what 𝐒𝐫𝐚𝐬𝐬𝐫𝐨𝐨, did I get the name right? 𝐒𝐫𝐚𝐬𝐬𝐫𝐨 said. I think it was brilliant. And just to respond to the issues of, yes, for the Francophone constituency, yes, we are moving towards having some of these programs, both in English and French, but we do have another conversation on Thursday. It's a different topic, but that is in French. And I'm sure my colleagues will share the link on that. But I do like what you said, 𝐒𝐫𝐚𝐬𝐬𝐫𝐨. What you're basically saying, 𝐒𝐫𝐚𝐬𝐬𝐫𝐴, is that we cannot give what we don't have. And so as civil society, as we are engaging with the communities, to that extent, how are we ourselves thinking strategically in terms of the work we do? To what extent are we accountable? To what extent are we transparent? To what extent are we collaborating with each other instead of competing? So these are very, very good things. And you are right about the environments in different countries are different. Of course, in certain countries, it's more open, so you can engage. In other countries, it's more closed. But basically, the principles remain the same. I think it's about the application. We have a lot of work to do, and 𝐒𝐫𝐚𝐬𝐬𝐫𝐴 is absolutely right about that. We have a lot of work to do to strengthen the way we do things, to become that mirror that society can really look at and as an example. And so for that one, nobody can do it for us. We, moving forward, those of us who are a bit of the younger generation, I think it's time we learn from the mistakes and try to do things differently. So my challenge to everyone is, let us be more collaborative. Let us think about partnership. Let us think about learning, even beyond our borders. You know, let's work with each other more, and let's do things differently. Let's be more accountable and transparent. I think then we'll see the changes that we want to see. So 𝐒𝐫𝐚𝐬𝐬𝐫𝐴, thanks for that. I think Wasiru makes a very valid point. I mean, this kind of work we do, it's about society, it's about passion, it's a vocation. It comes with frustration, and the frustration sometimes, in many ways, in sometimes people, there's a lack of understanding of what we're trying to do. But you asked a good question. How do you pull people along? I feel like sometimes we need to look at our approaches in terms of how we engage communities. Many communities have become, because of the traditional way NGOs have engaged, they become very dependent. They are very, you know, they are like recipients. They are waiting to receive something. They are not really active. They have a lot of question marks because of the previous things that we did or the things we continue to do. Where we enter into communities, we do certain projects, we don't build any sort of collective ownership of the project, and then we go away. And then the project can't sustain itself. So communities are also skeptical. But there's also, I think we also need to consider the way we engage communities. Sometimes these traditional ways of, you know, sitting around and talking about the project, and this is my vision, and this is my mission, may not be the way. Maybe it's about co-creating the whole process with the community. So if you have a certain community group, and you say it's a community-based,
Charles? Okay, it looks like we have lost Charles for a moment there, but I think we can continue with the conversation whilst he sorts out his connection. There's another contribution from Gladys. Gladys?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. My name is Gladys, and I work with Visions for Nigeria Foundation. I'm going to speak generally, especially in country context, just as my fellow colleagues and last speakers have said. In country context in engaging with grassroots differs, especially when it comes to how they perceive their government. I think at this point in time, what CSOs need to be doing is having a place at the table in drafting out policies and making sure when decisions are being taken at the government high-level meetings, they are there to speak forth. For instance, when we talk about the COP, the climate change issues, when they talk about EU for meetings for us, you see 𝐈𝐦𝐻𝐸s being represented, civil societies at Western space being represented and having a voice. But when it comes to Africa, you barely see our CSOs being represented to showcase what we need to start speaking up for. And that's the reason why like Charles said, we use community and they become too dependent on the CSO for take out or hands out, as the case may be. It's time we need to be sitting at high-level deliberations to be part of those who decide policies that runs grassroots engagement, even at political space, because it is what they get back from their representative, especially in the government circle, that they live for. We just come in like stopgap to very, very unusual, maybe just say unusual interventions or irregular interventions. But deep down, there's so much we need to do. I give you an example of the situation in my country currently as per the oil theft, and as the case may be. You see communities who are suffering this oil bunkering. They don't have a voice. Okay, after now, the government comes, catch those who are doing this illegal bunkering and all that. What next for the community? They go back to their lives. Their lives are not improved. You understand? But these are the people who make the citizens of the country. These are the people who the government sits to decide what the country is supposed to do. So I feel CSOs at this point needs to be sitting at places of relevance, high-level places of relevance with the government and calling out issues that is necessary. That way, it can replicate at the grassroots level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gladys. And I think you raise a very important issue relating to CSO participation. Also, this goes back to what Charles was highlighting, the importance of strategic thinking at the design stage. So as an organization, identifying the areas where you want to have an impact and where you want to see change, and then putting together the steps that you need to take to get there. So if it means that we want to see ourselves participate more in decision-making platforms, what steps are we taking to get there? And this obviously goes back to us going to the drawing board and discussing what resources we have or what resources we need to ensure that we get there. But I absolutely agree that it's time that CSOs are also at the table, making contribution to decision-making processes and representing the communities that they are working with. I'll give the floor to Atanga Gilbert. Gilbert? You can unmute yourself.
Hello? Am I the one?
Yes, you can go ahead, Mr. Obono.
Okay.
It appears Gilbert is muted for now.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me be very brief. I am so delighted to be here. And when I listened to your question concerning our important topic that is ongoing, when we talk about grassroots, we are not talking only about our communities. We are much also talking about our group. We are talking about some strata, like some class of vulnerable people that cannot protect themselves. We are as well talking about some group depending on the environment. But most importantly, we have to consider the environmental factors. For instance, what works in Central Africa may not work in the West African region. It may not work in the sub-Saharan area. That is why most of the time, as I have headed non-governmental organizations in my establishment or in my ministry, it is always gladden my heart to, that's in my country, to discuss on the effects of, or what my people, that is the CSOs and the non-governmental organizations are doing, that is in the life of our commoners, or maybe our people, or groups, or structures, or in our various locations in my country. They are really trying, they are fronting even the government policies, even beyond what is expected. They are going beyond that. Especially, let me cite an instance of an NGO, that's a Nigerian national NGOs committee, that is coordination, NGO in Nigeria, that registered almost more than 500 NGOs, and they are carrying them along through so much capacity building, a lot of things they are doing in Nigeria. And that is how our people equally, they are also trying, doing so many things. But the area now I am trying to come in is to stress that the moment our people, for us to know the level of impact all these CSOs and NGOs must have affected in our, that is among our populace, I will suggest that some of us should go into holding JARS, that is joint annual reviews. These are the things that will help us to know the extent we have impacted on our grassroots, on our communities, on our urbans, on our platforms, on our groups. It is very, very important. The moment we start looking towards that, I think we will achieve great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bono, and thank you for highlighting this. I'll also add on to your comment and a contribution made by Bukola. They say that I believe that the best way to achieve the aforementioned is going back to our communities, our grassroots, since charity begins at home. On politics, how do we install or ordain our traditional community and religious leaders at the grassroots level? The way we have them on board will definitely influence those we elect into local, state, or national leadership positions. They go on to say that, in other words, we Africans will need to start educating ourselves right from the grassroots on all spheres of life. We need to give ourselves the right information on all issues at every point. So I think what we are seeing, or what is common from all of us, is that we all have the opportunity to retrace our step on how we have previously conducted ourselves, and obviously the gaps and challenges that we have encountered, and then take up the ideas and strategic points that Charles has alluded to today and incorporate those, and then change the manner in which we operate as organizations. So this means that going back to the drawing board and looking at our strategic operations, or generally our structural operations, and then moving on from there. We are privileged because we have access to the article. If we check the chat box, there's a link that has been shared there on the article, so we can always access it.
Okay, please, moderator, thank you. Please, I'm not cutting you short. If I may say something, I was aware what we had, the steps we have advised and the things we are doing. But sometimes it's not that I am against the traditional rulers, or I'm against all those class. But I can tell you that most of the time, these traditional rulers, these people we call our leaders, they are not doing much more than the CSOs, more than the NGOs, because these NGOs, they cannot be compromised because their sponsors want them to go in the line. Because when I raise my proposal, if my proposal does not tally with your own line of action, or maybe your own objective or scopes, you cannot just ask me to come up. But when you now finally ask me to come up, maybe, for instance, I have a personal NGO that is speaking on that is advocacy for health rights and reintegration of indigent persons and indigent prisoners. If you are not working in that line, you will not bring me up. But when you now bring me up, I have to work in order to satisfy your own profile. Therefore, we cannot make mention of most of these leaders because we see that they are easily compromised by those on the authority, more than these NGOs and CSOs. Please, if we can, as we have that's your own organization, that is WACI. If we can as well obtain, then working in line with an NGO, if we can get both in North Africa, in the South Africa, then in the Central Africa and the West Sub-Saharan Africa regions, if we get all this sort of organization, I think we will achieve greater. And when we now go into joint annual review, we will do great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your contribution. I think related to that and all the points that you raised, I'll give back the floor to Charles, but I want to ask Charles, and I'm sure he was listening in to all the points that you raised. I'll give him about 5-6 minutes to talk to us, but I want him in his response to indicate to us how, as grassroots organizations or general organizations working in different communities, how can we be more strategic? How can we ensure that we are not replicating what we have done in the past, which probably has not served us well? What key takeaways does he want us to leave with today that he would say for us to change the manner in which we have been thinking about the impacts that we want to have as civil society organizations in whichever country? What are the factors that we need to take on board, and also make sure that when we then develop our own strategic plan or our own strategic operational infrastructure, we ensure that it works and we have successes, and it incorporates the SWOT analysis that he talked to us about. So Charles, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rua, and thanks for the contributions. They've been very rich. Thank you so much. I've learned a lot. I think one of the things for me that we need to really think deeply about is how we even engage with our own community members, especially for us who are in civil society, who are in grassroots organizations. To what extent are we really listening to our communities? And I think listening sounds very simple, but I believe that we are not doing enough listening really to understand what drives them, their interests, what are their priorities, their concerns. So the first thing I will say is for us to do more listening, less talking, or more listening to communities, really trying to understand what drives communities, the history of these communities, why they do what they do, why they don't do certain things. There's always an explanation. And so listening is key. Another thing is learning. To what extent are we learning from the past? Are we learning from our mistakes? Are we learning? How do we take the learning forward? How do we integrate learning into our thinking processes? What I've seen is that there's always a repetition. We are always duplicating. We seem to be going around in circles. We take 4 steps in front and then 2 steps back, right? And so one of the things we should ask ourselves is, what have we put in place to foster learning within our own organizations, but also as we engage with communities? Do we do enough reflections? The danger within civil society is that we spend a lot of time implementing activities, doing reporting, and we have very little time for learning and reflection. And it shows in terms of the impact we are making, which we could even make much greater impact. Another thing is, it's also about focusing on impact. And I think that's one of our biggest challenges. How do we move away? And this is where strategic thinking can really help. How do you move away to be so much focused on activities, projects, but how do we move beyond that to focus on impact, to reimagine how our societies can be? I always say this. I always ask people, if they tell you to describe your society in 2050, the way you want it to be, is it easy for you to do so? If they ask you to draw a picture of how your community or how your organization can be in 2050, can you do that? Do we do enough visioning and reimagining? Do we focus on impact, right? And that's one of the things that I think we need to really, and strategic thinking helps with that. So we shouldn't be in a rush to just plan, but we should focus a lot on the designing, on the thinking, right? That goes into the planning. Another thing that I think we should, that strategic thinking, I think can help us with is the ability to forecast, our ability to be proactive. Look, we don't have a choice anymore. We react a lot, and I can understand the frustration of our colleagues like Bukala and Mrs. Ogbonna. I get that frustration, and the reason I think we are actually frustrated is because we tend to be reactive. Things happen. We wait for something to happen, and then we react as communities. We don't have that mechanism that we've put in place to forecast the dangers that are coming. We don't have that mechanism to look into, like they say, into the crystal ball to see what is coming so that we can take steps to prevent it, right? So I think strategic thinking helps us to be to focus more on prevention than actually firefighting. And we do a lot of firefighting as civil society, waiting for things to happen. Then we say we're going to do a campaign. Then we do our advocacy, etc., which is good, which I feel we've contributed a lot. But how can we get ahead of the problem? How do we work together, do more thinking so that we can forecast what is coming ahead, so that we can be more proactive? I think the more proactive we are, the more sustainable we will be and the more influential we'll be. And these are the benefits of strategic thinking. So strategic thinking basically is being able to invest a lot more in the designing of our initiatives, in our community engagement, in ensuring that our communities are participating in shaping our visions and our objectives, in building that ownership, which is key to making us not only survive, but to thrive. So this is what I'll add to all the other rich contributions from today's conversation. So thank you, Rua.
Well, thank you so much, Charles. It certainly has been a rich conversation, and thank you all for sharing your experiences and also sharing the frustrations that you're coming across. I'll just indicate or highlight some of the points that have been raised by Atanga Gilbert. He says, thank you, Mr. Charles, and all the organizers of this important event. In my point of view, civil society organizations are doing their best in Africa, but duty bearers such as our governments have no strategic policy roadmaps for accelerated development of Africa. Policymakers and implementers show no or little interest on community development, particularly in the areas of education, agriculture, health, climate change, and general economic advancement. And I think he's echoing what has been raised by the others, that we are still seeing problems with the partners that we are working with. I think as Charles has highlighted, let's take the time to listen, let's take the time to learn, and then also develop a more proactive approach, such that when we then think of how our strategic thinking time, or the time that we're investing in strategic thinking, can be linked up to impact, we see a change in how our partners and the people that we're working with organizations that we're engaging with, respond to us. Thank you so much for all your participation. Let's take the opportunity to use the chat box to share one of the key lessons that we have drawn from these conversations, and a key takeaway that we intend to at least, I don't know, implement or find ways to think about as an organization. I think we have the opportunity now, since we have started this conversation. Also, let's not end the conversation here. We have seen the people who are in this webinar. Let's engage each other. Let's find ways to learn from each other, and let's find ways to keep sharing experiences and make better our organizations. I don't know if Charles has a final point that he would like to make.
Yes, just one more thing. Thanks, Rua, for that. There is more in collaborating than competing. Let's think collaborative advantage. Competitive advantage is dead.
Thank you so much, Charles. I don't see any more hands up with people wanting to contribute. So I will take this time to thank everyone for attending, and please use the link that is in the chat to register so that you get a recording of this webinar, and also use the link in the chat to have access to Charles' fantastic article so that you can also share with your colleagues at work and also share with your partners that you're working with on how they can incorporate strategic thinking into their work. Thank you so much, and we are looking forward to seeing you in the next webinar, which will be on Thursday, and it will be in French. Thank you.